Yeah, standing on solid rock, sacred ground, Goanna. I love that song, and particularly, I guess, after our Twilight Markets put on by Bindi Bindi and IPL Radio on Australia Day, and everything there. That was great fun. All right, it's you're listening to Pete's Talking Music on IPL Radio, and we've had a little bit of music, and we've got more coming up, of course. But let's get on with the talk side of it today. Now, work is a big thing in most of our lives, or our lives for most of us. And for young people, a first job is something that we remember, I think, hopefully with fondness and nostalgia. But these days, there's a level of formality with any job. And even though our young people are far more worldly now, in a whole bunch of, different perspectives, they're still thrust into a world where they have little knowledge. All of a sudden, they're having to try and understand the workplace and awards and EBAs and things called letters of appointment and workers' compensation and all of those things. Now, my guest today has written a book for young and new workers to the Australian workplace. It gives a broad outline of what laws govern our workplace and what they mean. Now, like I was saying there, for example, what are awards or an EBA, workers' comp insurance, safety in your workplace, employment contracts and policies, etc. Now, young people, I think, are among the most vulnerable when it comes to things like wage theft and feeling like they maybe don't have a voice. Now, whether that's a knowledge thing and they don't have the tools in the toolbox to say something, or whether they feel intimidated that if they say something, well, maybe they won't have a job. Now, having two teenage children and having both look at me pretty blankly when I ask about their employment conditions, I think this is a very much needed book. So the name of the book is How Work Works, and our author is Matthew Elliott, and he's with me today. G'day, Matthew. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Hang on a minute. I better give you some microphone there. How are you, Matthew?
Very well, thank you, and thank you for having me today.
You are more than welcome. Thanks for being on Pete's Talking Music. Now, Matthew, what was your first job?
I was a bar attendant in Adelaide at a place called the Bath Hotel in Nord on the Parade. I was just about to turn 18, working behind a front bar.
17 and working behind the bar.
I think I was 17, yeah.
That's a bit naughty.
Yes, it was.
So your employer didn't ask for your birth certificate or anything?
Oh, no, not back in those days. There was no such thing as CVs or work history or anything. It was just, have you got a job?
Now, tell me about How Work Works, your book.
Well, in your introduction, I thoroughly support and agree with you that the young people are the most vulnerable. I believe that when they go into the workplace, they have little to no understanding about how work works. And statistically, it's shown that they're more likely to have an accident in the workplace because they're either too overly keen or eager, or they're not guided through that process. So the idea about how work works is to give young people and new workers some idea about how it works, where to get information, and to hopefully help them land more safely in the workplace.
It's something you could write more than a book on this. You could write 50 books on it, couldn't you? So your book that you've put together is, and I've got sitting here in front of me. It seems very short and sweet, and it's enough to give a basic understanding to someone who might be 15, 16, 17, 18, or perhaps an immigrant who is new to the country and doesn't really understand what they're entitled to, because sometimes the work environment from their point of origin might be quite different. It looks just ideal. I'm going to steal this today. You do know
please,
that.
Yeah, it's all yours.
I'm going to take it home for my two kids.
So it's only 22 chapters and just on 100 pages. And the idea was to keep it as simple as possible. And that was for the easy to read and to understand and to follow. The other reason was for that is I don't believe it's possible to write a book that is defining everything in the workplace. there's over 15 forms of legislation, possibly 20, that affect us in the workplace. That is over 20,000 pages that you may have to read to actually get a better understanding. So it's more about trying to help people to guide them about where they get information and how they can narrow down specifically on what they want.
It's just that bit of basic knowledge, isn't it? That's that's worth its weight in gold. What prompted you to put all this information together for young people?
Well, like yourself, I have children. My two eldest children hit the workforce, and I believe both of them had pretty poor experiences.
Yep.
One was terminated by being sick, which is highly frowned upon.
Absolutely.
And the second one was what I would term to be underpaid and exploited in the workplace in a franchise. So looking at the agreements and guiding them through that. I believe that young people's first jobs are the most important jobs because it sets them up for a really good, healthy working life. The other thing is I've worked in the hospitality industry for a very long period of time. I'm a qualified chef. The amount of young people I've worked with and new arrivals into this country who are just blinded. They're suddenly bombarded with a whole lot of information that they get when they start their job. We all just sign the contract and we all walk away. We just want the job.
Yep.
And they find it quite confusing about where they are and what it all means. So I would ask people, 17, 18-year-old kids in the kitchen, how are your terms and conditions set? And they go, well, I don't know. I just get my pay. So they were the prompting or the driving forces behind that, to help my kids and to help the other people.
Look, Matthew, you say that. Now, I've got two teenage kids, one 17, one 19, and both either have or still are working in hospitality, and not that I'm suggesting that any of their current or past employers have done anything wrong, but I ask them, what sort of an agreement or contract are you on, or have you got a letter of appointment so that we can understand, let's just make sure you're getting paid right. And just get this blank look and, I think, I don't want to talk about it, What is it that makes our young people vulnerable to they call it wage theft, don't they?
A lot of people are trying to term it as wage theft or just to move away from the term of underpayment, because it does indicate, if I was to take $1,000 from my employer, it's called theft.
Yeah.
And to me, it would be equal that it would be wage theft that way as well. I think a lot of people in the hospitality industry are young. They're either doing study, they could be a single parent, they're new to the country, it's an easy industry to get into.
Yes.
So they just want the job, or the job is a means to an end.
Yeah.
That, I think it helps for potentially an employer to not exploit, but not get it right, maybe, because they also have a high turnover of staff. I did read once, I don't know how correct it is these days, that 7% of the country is employed in the hospitality industry, but they'd make up something like 45% of the cases in Fair Work Australia.
Yeah. And I guess, it's all well and good for us to sit here and go, we talk about wage theft and everything like that. Look, I'm sure that there's some very calculated employers who routinely try and rip off their employees for their own benefit. Particularly hospitality. It's a tough industry, but I also think there's some inadvertent. I'm sure there would be some inadvertent errors made because I know from personal experience. I've had my own business for 18 years and have worked in industry with EBAs and awards and everything like that. Some of those documents would have to be the most confusing, convoluted, difficult to understand and interpret, and you could put 5 people who might have 20 years each in front of each of these awards or EBAs, and they will each have a different interpretation, and particularly in hospitality, because you've got odd hours, you've got penalty rates, you've got dozens of different levels of classification and competence, and whether you've got a first aid certificate or this or that, you can have 100 staff and they'll be on 150 different conditions. Is that a fair comment?
I believe so. They do try and make them as user-friendly as possible, EBAs, but an employer can just bamboozle you. By the time you're into 6 clauses, you go, I'm too confused, I don't want to go anywhere. Or they refer to another clause or another EBA or another award that you move around on. I was underpaid $7,500 in 3 months by an employer who didn't use an EBA, didn't use the award, just made up his own pay rate. And that was in 2018, and when I questioned that, we
So
had
only 2018. So
yes, only recently. It's not.
Wow.
I've seen. So in that year, I was actually underpaid $11,000 between 2 employers, and I believe both of them went out of their way to do that. Well, the one without a contract just made up his own figure and paid, and away he went. So it does happen, and through my own experiences, I've experienced that, and it is quite hard to claw that back. It can be quite.
Well, it sounds like, you know, anything to do with that is just a long, laborious process. Often legal representatives are involved, and bureaucrats and Lord knows what. Now, you know, we hear unfortunately quite a bit about this in the hospitality sector, and I guess a really high profile example of that is our celebrity chef George Columbaris, with underpaying his workers. Now, whether that was calculated or inadvertent, we don't know. George will always claim, you know, he had no idea, and whatever that. I'm not here to crucify celebrity chefs, but you know, we also hear of big names in industry like Woolworths and Bunnings, and you know, there's a whole raft of others that are, I guess, self-declaring at the moment. Why is that?
I believe the laws are about to change in regards to wage theft, that the penalties are going to come a lot higher or stricter, or that could be in place now.
Right.
They were beginning, I understand, to self-declare to avoid that transition in legislation. It was better to own up at a certain point before that legislation came in. That's what I understand it to be. And it was a significant amount of money. We're talking millions.
Oh, millions and millions.
Millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And we talk about improving our wages, cost of living and everything like that. And it makes it even harder when you're not even getting paid correctly to meet your needs outside of work. On your living, it has to be a living wage.
Yes. Yeah.
So I'll talk about a living wage in there. So
I think you talk about a lot of things. Now tell me, Matthew, what is an award?
Every Australian worker works under a system of an award. It's either in the state or the federal system.
Mm-hmm.
From doctors through to, there's an award called Miscellaneous Workers Award, which if you're not covered by the particular award, then you fall under the miscellaneous.
Yeah.
So everyone is covered by that. And it sets out your basic terms and conditions of employment, being pay, leave, sick leave. Not sick leave so much these days, because back in 2010 they took everything that's in every workplace and placed it in what's now called the NES, the National Employment Standards.
Yes. Yep.
And there's 11 of those. So the award will set out the particular pay and conditions for that particular industry. Now, awards are industry based, not profession based. So as a chef, as I said, I am a qualified chef. I can work on a ship, then I can move to a service station, then I can move to a restaurant, and I can be under 3 different awards. It's not a chef award, it's an industry based award. To actually work out whether you're in a state or federal system, normally it says if you're a PTY LTD company, or if you're set up that way, then you fall into the federal system.
Okay.
But then all local governments in WA fall, even though they're not in a PTY LTD and they're not out of the state, they fall into the federal system. So like all areas of law, it can be very confusing. It can clear as mud, I suppose is the term.
Did I hear you can work for the state, but you're under a federal award?
You work for the state in local government and you're in the federal system.
Yeah.
Which seems very confusing. You should be in the state system.
I'm confused already. Yeah. So you've got an award, and then you have something called an EBA, an Enterprise Bargaining Agreement. What's that, and what's the difference between that and an award?
Sorry, an EBA can be called many things: a collective agreement, Enterprise Bargaining Agreement, workplace agreement. But all the names mean the same thing. And basically, it's when the employer and the employee sit down and negotiate their terms of conditions of employment. for a period of 3 to 4 years. It can be shorter. It can't be longer than 4 years. But then agreements don't just die. We don't fall into the abyss when the expiry date comes along. So the employer and the employee sit down. They negotiate the terms and conditions. The idea is behind it is because business conditions can change in a short period of time.
Yeah, but don't we know it?
Living expenses can change in a short period of time. So instead of waiting for governments to change an award, you have more frequency to do it under an EBA. EBAs can be standalone, so they can't be read within another industrial instrument, or they can be read in conjunction with an award. It gets a little bit confusing then when you're dealing with 2 or 3 documents, but and the EBA should not go underneath the terms and conditions of an award. So there's a system in place in Fair Work called the Boots test, better off overall test.
Yep.
And that test is designed to make sure that workers don't fall under the conditions of the award.
Right.
But there's been a few interesting cases about that, whether it's over, because the term overall has so if 80% are overall better off and then 20% aren't, then possibly the agreement may or may not get up. But so EBAs they're highly complex. There's a very strict way of putting it together.
Yep.
There's a whole lot of protocols that have to be followed to actually even get to the table. Then you have to go through a whole different system, or a whole system to make sure that it's done legally. And then it has to be registered in the courts.
Now, I talk to my kids. They come home and they go, "Dad, I've got a new job, and I got signed up and I start next week," or something like that. Because the employment market as it is at the moment, but both kids, when they've gone for jobs, they get asked one question, and it's, "When can you start?" So what a great environment for our young people in finding work. But I go, "Okay, where's your letter of appointment, and what are your terms and conditions?" And I just get this blank stare, or it's all right, I'm not too worried about that. And I guess from hard-earned experience, if it ain't read, it ain't said, and you need to have something in concrete. Why is a letter of appointment so vital and important in the process?
I think the letter of appointment, or letter of contract, or letter of offer, once again, it can have many different names, is one of the most important documents in the workplace. It outlines what industrial instrument the employer is using to establish your terms and conditions of employment. It sounds like a bit of a mouthful.
Setting the foundation, isn't it?
It sets the foundation. It allows your kids then to go off and actually research, okay, well, I can then read that document about how I'm supposed to be paid, what I'm to be paid, how, if I have a dispute, how do I settle that? What are my hours of work?
Yes.
So the span of hours is a really important thing that's established in an EBA or an award. Just a span of hours is normally 6 till 6, Monday to Friday. You work outside of those hours, your penalties kick in. So the span of hours is a really important thing to find out. It also tells me that the letter of contract means that the employer has actually researched it and knows what they need to be doing, and they're willing to share that information. It's when they don't write those letters that I go, oh, hang on, they either don't know or they don't want you to know. Sometimes I believe employers think if they don't tell their staff that they've got the upper hand, they can run a little bit of a muck. I actually think it's a real disadvantage. It shows for me, if I don't get a letter of employment, I won't work for them. It just, in my experience, creates a mess.
So it like you say, it sets that foundation and the terms and conditions of employment and everything like that. And then I guess, say a young person's been working at a job and they work out, oh, I think I've been underpaid here, or I haven't been paid for a break because I'm working longer hours or a double shift or something like that, or whatever appropriate rates for a weekend or late at nights or something, and they talk to their employer and say, look, I'd like to query this and everything, and they end up in a dispute. What is a dispute, and how does it all work?
So the Fair Work Act, the Federal Act, the State Act, the award and EBAs have to have what's called a dispute resolution clause. So if a dispute does rise in the workplace, these are the steps you have to follow to resolve that. I think they need to change the name to unicorn kisses or something, because just the word dispute is quite negative in itself, and it turns people off, I believe. A good employer will welcome that, because it then allows work to continue, it allows open and honest communication, it allows resolution, and the workforce is happy. You can't dispute just anything willy-nilly in the workplace. The dispute resolution clause is quite clear normally about what you can dispute. It has to be a part of the EBA, the award, or the NES is normally what it is. And then you have to try and resolve it in the workplace with a manager. And if you're still unhappy, then you can go into Fair Work. It takes a lot of courage to stand up. It takes a lot of courage for people to say, I think I'm being underpaid. And then suddenly you can find yourself sitting in an office with a manager and a lawyer and an accountant and a payroll saying, no, we're right. You really do have to have a lot of ducks lined up to make sure. You have to feel confident in yourself that you're doing that. I've done it a couple of times. It can be really intimidating, and particularly for young people. It's the first time maybe that you're having to deal with something like that at that level. It's quite hard. That's why there's agencies out there, and I also offer myself for that purpose to help people through those disputes. And
I was going to ask you about that, because part of your background notes that I got sent through is that as well as this book, you make yourself available for consulting to help people through these processes, and I guess you can certainly offer the benefit of first-hand knowledge and first-hand experience, having been involved in the hospitality sector for so many years and everything. So how does that work?
So I'm available to help anyone explain whatever the issue is in the workplace. If they just want a little bit of advice, or if they even want to run a dispute in the workplace, I'm happy to guide them through that process, or even be the representative in that place. Once again, it does take a lot of courage to stand up, even for a young person to be there, and if I'm sitting there, to actually go through that process. So I also make myself available for, I'd like to do presentations to new arrivals, vulnerable people in the workplace, high schools, TAFEs, universities. I've written a lesson plan, 40-minute presentation, to give people a basic understanding, or new workers a basic understanding about how to go.
So you've got a presentation package ready to sit and let young people and new workers, immigrants perhaps, know all about this.
Well, once again, I can't let them know all about it in 40 minutes, and I think it takes 40 years. But
yes.
Well, even then, I'm still scratching my head. There were major changes in the legislation late last year, which in state and federal systems, which I'm still sure a lot of people are wrapping their heads around. But the 40 minutes, I think it explains the basics that we've talked about today. What are awards? Yes. How do you fall into state and federal systems? What is an EBA? And then I touch on workers' compensation insurance, which I think is one of the most underrated discussed topic in a workplace, and safety. And then if I have enough time, answer questions, or even policies are a very important part of that as well. Mm-hmm. So workers' compensation, I think, is, as I said, one of the most underrated, discussed points in a workplace, and I think most workers should have a much better idea about how that works.
Some of your other topics here, you've got meetings and employment termination and superannuation and pay rises and CPI and everything. How do things go with termination? Because that's a two-way street, isn't it? You can terminate your employment and say, I'm out of here, I quit. Is there a right and wrong way to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Every award and every EBA will set out the guidelines of how someone is to be terminated, whether it's voluntary or forced termination. Mm-hmm. And forced termination can be, as we all know, sacking, or it can be a redundancy. Yep. Voluntary or forced redundancy as well. So it usually works on how many years of service is how much notice either party has to give. And it does vary from industry to industry. So 1 to 3 years is a week, 3 to 5 can be 2 weeks. But again, it's a matter of just checking your award or your EBA. Either party can just make it immediate, but then you have to pay for failed notice or in lieu of notice.
In lieu of notice,
In lieu
yes.
of notice.
Yep.
And that's either party. So the employer can have a right to withhold money in lieu of notice.
Yes.
So, and the employer, if they want you off the site, usually straight away, and most employers normally do, if they're terminating your employment for a misconduct or something, they tend to just pay you out and get you off site. So.
And pay slips. I ask my kids, where's your pay slip? Let me have a look. And again, it's like, oh, I get that on my phone. You know, it's all electronic these days.
Oh, yeah.
How's that all meant to work?
There's legislation in it's in the Fair Work that what a pay slip must and must not have. It has the ABN, the the pay cycle dates, the date of the pay, who's it to, the amount, any deductions, and deductions can be anything from social club, money owing, taxation, has to have super, a few other things. But the one thing I find really important on pay slips is it doesn't necessarily have to have your accrued leave on there. So
that's interesting.
It is, isn't
Why
it?
is that? Do you know?
It's just not in there. It's a lot of employers do it. We're quite used to seeing it. A lot of employers don't, and they go, oh, we just don't have to. But I asked once, and I say this in the book, why don't you? And they said, well, we don't want people taking their leave. But it's still there. And so the leave chapter in my book, I show you actually how to calculate your leave.
Right.
So even if it's not on your payslip, you can sit at home and just easily calculate your leave and how much you're entitled to. So a quick Google actually just gives you what needs to be on a payslip and stuff like that. So, yeah.
That's interesting because it's the only time I've queried an employer's connection with me is through leave and how much leave I had and how it was accrued, because I was on different rates and I was working on site as an engineer, and then I came back to an office job and I wanted to take my break, and I said, well, hang on a minute, I accrued that leave at that rate, but you're going to pay me at a different rate. That's not fair. So anyway, enough about me. So look, that's that's really interesting. Matthew, let's take a short break now. Now, what I do with all of my guests is ask whether you have a favourite song. Now, you've brought in one of your cheer squad today, one of your kids, and she's sitting here patiently listening to you. She didn't want to come on and have a chat because I was going to ask her a few questions and put her on the spot. But Katie is here and she's nominated a song, and she's even too chicken to come up and tell us what it is. But she loves Spacey Jane, so and it's good for you. So, Matthew, how about you introduce our song and we'll play it and then come back.
This is Good For You by Spacey Jane.
Let's go.